Just to recap the master plan purpose and vision, the Salt Lake City Council gave us 3 guiding purposes, and the first one is to guide the preservation and management of the cemetery. The second is to expand access to and enhance appropriate uses of the cemetery as a multi-use facility. And the third is to address the future financial sustainability of the cemetery. This exhaustive review of the cemetery represents $27 million in recommended upgrades, and the team identified a phasing approach to meet these needs and also to accomplish council goals. The resulting master plan vision statement is to preserve and enhance the Salt Lake City Cemetery as an active cemetery and public open space that invites the public to enjoy the cemetery's historic, recreational, and natural resources.
The master plan purpose, number 1, guide and preserve the management of the cemetery. These are the recommendations for the preservation: to apply for the National Register of Historic Places, to develop a preservation management plan, to conduct historic documentation and investigation, to have the cemetery an arboretum, to maintain the wildlife habitat. There are many operational asset renewal projects that need to be addressed, allowing the city to fulfill its obligation and to help preserve this jewel for the future generations. These are the listed recommendations that were brought out.
So continuing with the preservation and management of the cemetery are the capital asset renewal of the roadways, and these include repairing critical roadways and storm drainage, and then also looking to restrict vehicle access on low priority roadways. So the roadway repair is broken down into 6 segments of work, although still large but fundable, and they total $12.5 million of the $27 million. The cemetery roads already function as a multi-use facility with the space shared by pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles. So one of the things when we analyze the roadways, 51% are in poor condition, 38% in fair condition, and only 11% were considered average. Another thing we looked at is current use and function. So what are the critical roads for the community and maintenance, and also level of use? And this helped develop a street hierarchy to inform phasing. What you see in red and orange in the diagram are really phase 1 or priority 1 roads for repair, and they are the most important for access as well as greatest need. These are our first priority. The team also identified the roads that could have limited vehicular access to enhance the pedestrian experience and also increase the serviceable life of the pavement along those roadways. The second master plan purpose includes expanding the access to and enhancing appropriate uses of the cemetery as a multi-use facility. Those recommendations include enhancing and developing the opportunities for walking, cycling, and other active transportation, developing the historic interpretation potential, cultivating friends and partners of the cemetery, adding columbarium walls, and finding ways to activate the cemetery. The list to the right include the activities that the community felt were appropriate in this cemetery and really fit with the character. The plan, the one thing to note is that the cemetery is entirely platted grave sites with the exception of the sexton grounds and the roads. So what you see in the enhancement plan are proposed improvements aligning with those 2 spaces. So the proposed enhancements reflect community priorities, and that is historic interpretation and pedestrian amenities are shown in green, pedestrian and active transportation improvements are shown in blue, locations for columbariums to maintain an active cemetery, and enhanced connections to the surrounding neighborhoods and open space. The site that provides the greatest opportunity for creating a multi-use site is the building and grounds around the Sexton facility. It's a little bit over 2 acres, and this is a concept just to show what the potential is. The redevelopment of the grounds as shown, includes a formal gathering space and a memorialization opportunity, columbarium walls with over 1,600 niches, and a pavilion and gathering space. On the right is a sketch plan for a relocated maintenance facility, and that would also include an opportunity with public access with a new pavilion and parking.
Okay, master plan purpose number 3 is to address the future financial sustainability of the cemetery. And this is broken up into 2 parts. The first part here is ongoing operations and maintenance funding. And there were 4 recommendations that came out of the master plan. The columbarium niche walls, to raise opening and closing fees, to raise stone monitoring fees, and to establish a perpetual care fund. In the middle of the on the graph there, it shows current expenses are $1.4 million annually that the cemetery spends. The blue and green graph are current and potential revenues. So the blue being existing revenues, the next lighter blue is using perpetual care option 3, and then the light blue and the green are increases in fees to the revenue. I wanted to just mention the 3 options for the perpetual care. The first is a one-time $20 million bulk payment, and this would be put into an account that with the interest covering operating expenses up to $1 million per year, assuming that the interest rate in the account is 5%. The second option is to establish a fund over a 10-year period. And this would require depositing funds in 4 equal payments of $5 million every other year and $4 million on the last year, and the cost of that is $24 million. And the last option is a one-time payment into an account with interest would provide distributions in perpetuity at approximately $250,000 per year. And that's for the operating and maintenance funds. The second piece of this is how do we fund the capital asset renewal and the capital improvement funding. And there were 3 recommendations that came out of the master plan. The first one is to create a cemetery district. And if a cemetery district were to be created, and if Salt Lake City were to enact a tax rate that is the lowest of any comparable cemetery maintenance district that were reviewed, it would result in an annual revenue of $829,708 for the cemetery district. This option is feasible, and it would result in costs being spread throughout the population with potential of a moderate amount of annual revenue. The cons to this is the creation of a local district is a significant effort, and it could result in the loss of direct, or it would result in the loss of direct governance of the cemetery. The second option is a monthly park cemetery fee, and the pros to this, several communities in Utah do charge monthly fees for parks and recreation maintenance, including Harriman City. It would provide a steady stream of revenue that would grow each year based on the number of residential units in the city, and it also could be used for operations. So if a resident was charged $2 to $5, it would bring in $1.9 to $4.9 million in the first year. The cons is that the city would need to do an analysis to justify the fee charged is reflective of its needs to cover costs of city parks and open space maintenance, so the whole department.
Kristen,
Yeah.
are we allowed under state statute to implement that fee?
Yes. Yes.
And if we did it for the cemetery, why wouldn't we do it for all of our parks?
Well, I believe this is being proposed for all the parks. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Benji.
We need you to come up to a mic and you can grab that one on the desk right there, or the other one.
This one right here?
Yeah. And introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. I'm Benj Becker from Zions Bank. Yes, the park fee, a monthly park fee, would just be a park fee to be used at your discretion for all of the parks within Salt Lake City. You could delineate that however you wanted to the cemetery and other parks.
Is the $2 to $5, that's per resident, not per household?
It's per household.
Okay. And I guess we need to have more discussion, probably perhaps we could schedule another work session briefing just on this particular subject, because that's an intriguing idea.
Yes.
Thank you.
The last option, which everybody's familiar here with, is the general obligation bond, and it's the lowest cost form of borrowing. It would be a new source of revenues. The cons is that it could lack voter appeal. It must levy property tax on all the property. It's not viable for operations or maintenance expenses. So in your packet, you do have the 10-year implementation plan, but we just wanted to highlight in the first 2 years, the implementation plan. On the left there is the goals that we'd be addressing and the tasks that we will be looking at in the next 1 to 2 years and the costs associated with those. I'd just like to highlight that we are currently looking at applying for the National Register of Historic Places. We've also put in 3 CIPs for the cemetery this year, for the road repairs, wall repairs, and the beautification of the soil storage area. And we are currently working on upgrades to our website to improve the constituent knowledge of the cemetery, what's going on there. So that is our attempt at being a short presentation on the master plan, and we're happy to answer more questions. We have some folks here that can help us with that.
Council members? Lovers of the cemetery? Councilmember Wharton.
I am. Not only is it in my district, but I have a lot of family members buried there. So, what's the next closest example of a municipally operated cemetery of this size?
I would say probably Ogden City. We're the largest municipal
Right.
cemetery in the country. So I think Ogden is about 50 acres. We're 120 acres of just platted graves. So we have to look elsewhere out of the state to get a compare. So wouldn't Ogden be closest in the state? So that would be
I mean, most similar, sorry.
Similar.
most. We stand alone because we're so big. Like I say, Ogden's 50 acres. Most of your, I would say, independent or private cemeteries are anywhere from 50, 60 acres. So I think, when we do it, we do have to go outside of the state to get anything that's close to what our cemetery is, which is kind of it's kind of a neat thing and makes us original, but.
I would say it was established very closely in time to a lot of the cemeteries on the East Coast. So we're
Okay.
struggling with the same problems as a lot of cemeteries that are over 150, 160
Years old.
Yeah, so that's kind of what my questions were leading to is, what other models can we look to for comparisons? And because I imagine that this isn't.
Yeah, we were looking, if you look back at, the New York cemeteries, the ones on the East Coast that were established back then, they're running into the same issue where they're running out of space and they're trying to generate revenue and trying to keep going with being a municipal cemetery, so.
And the notion of creating a multi-use site is something that matches a lot of the East Coast cemeteries where they do lots of activities. And we did study comparison cemeteries in terms of uses and what are the range of activities. And there is a graph in the document that shows all of the activities that happen in cemeteries across the country. And we use that to share with the public to say which ones should happen here.
Okay. And because I'm wondering just how in other I don't know if there are other city managed cemeteries that are full and how they continue to fund because if they're not receiving any additional burial fees or any income or anything like that. Like how are they typically funded as parks, or are they?
When people purchase a cemetery plot, they pay for a perpetual care fee.
Right.
And not all municipalities have done this. In fact, it's not super common that they do this. But if they put that into an account, they would have this $20 million account that has interest.
Right.
And so they would be surviving off of that interest for years to come. And so that is a great way to pay for it. A lot of city cemeteries haven't done that, and so they're struggling, just like we are. But that is the intent, the original intent. It's just, for the Salt Lake City Cemetery, those funds went into the general fund.
I see.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, and when is it projected to be full?
We've got 900 graves left to sell at 150 sellable graves a year. We'll be sold out of graves in about 5 years. That being said, we have 24,000 pre-sold graves not yet used.
Oh.
If a percentage of those go double deep, you're looking at a potential of 60,000 more burials to do it. 400 burials a year, you're looking at about 80 years worth of burials. So you will have the revenue for the opening and closing of those graves
Right.
coming in, but you will not have the revenue for the sale of the grave. And that's where we're going to see a decrease in the revenue that's generated by the cemetery at the sale of graves. So in about 5 years, we'll be out of graves, but like I said, we'll be burying people for the next 100 years,
Right.
in family plots that are pre-purchased.
Right. So, yeah, probably myself included. So, looking forward to it. Let's see. So with the columbarium, would any of the fees for that be able to go towards creating and paying for this?
Yes, that would extend the life of the sellable grave. Right now, we have no columbarium. By doing the columbarium, we would extend the sellable grave spaces for many years to come.
Right. That
would generate the perpetual care and the opening and closing each time we did a columbarium burial. So we're looking to extend the life of the cemetery, and that would bring revenue in, yes.
But it wouldn't be anywhere near what's needed.
No.
Okay. Do you have any idea about how much it would be?
Yeah,
Like,
we have that here. So the market is supportive of roughly 50 to 75 niches sold per year. So the projected net revenue from each columbarium wall is estimated to be $25,000 to $35,000 a year from sales and fees. And then you also have the perpetual care that people pay for, and that would be $15,000 to $22,500 with revenues increasing as the niche internments increase.
okay, last question. If we created a fund now, instead of putting the money into the general fund, if we created a restricted account and put all of every money coming forward into that account and then all of the columbarium money, would that generate enough interest?
Probably not. We need, well, so if you look on this chart, so with just a $5 million deposit, you're going to get $250,000 a year. We can certainly do that moving forward with the columbarium walls as well as future burials. There's, 900 left to sell?
To sell, and then, like I say, the almost 60,000 left to do, so that could go in there.
Yeah, it'd just be a slow process. It wouldn't happen right away.
Fast enough.
Yeah, it won't make up what
I see.
has been put into the general fund.
I see. Sorry, I missed this graph. That's helpful. Okay.
Anything else? Okay. So I want to get to our policy questions. If no one else has any comments about the administration's prioritization of the cemetery projects, I know we just saw a brief bit of it and you're still not quite done.
Well,
Your
the draft
final.
is ready for your comments and review, and so it'll be complete once you give your input and any changes that the
Ooh,
council would like.
You mean right now?
Yes.
So you won't be coming back to us for approval of your master plan?
Oh, yes, we will, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
When?
After you give us your comments and changes.
Madam Chair, I want
Councilor
to reiterate
Rogers.
what you already asked, though. I want to learn more about the financing options, especially the perpetual care fund. That's something I've never heard of, so.
Well, it's, the opportunity for a fee for all of parks is an incredible conversation that we should have.
And we are exploring that right now with Fred Philpott.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's something that is just exploratory right now.
Mhm.
So we are looking into that. We don't have any numbers or anything to share at this time.
Okay, council, if you do not have any amendments or suggested changes to the priorities as they're laid out,
Madam Chair,
yes,
could I make a
Allison.
quick,
Help us be
just for
clear.
your reference, attachment C1 attached to the staff report actually has the list of the projects.
It's a
in
great
case
list. Great chart, whoever made that, thank you.
it was them.
So I'll assume silence to be okay, that we're good to go ahead with this. And we would like to provide feedback on the proposed funding amounts and sources. So
Right.
that is a follow-up that we would love to schedule this for a final approval, and also to schedule a conversation when you're ready to about the potential for a monthly parks fee that could address ongoing needs at the cemetery as well as other parks. Did I miss anything, council members? Councilmember Wharton was asking about other city models. It sounds like you have explored that, but perhaps when we schedule that follow-up
Can I add that?
discussion, you can bring to us some of the multi-revenue models, multi-stream revenue models that you've found in other cities to help contextualize that. I love the cemetery. I'm so glad to hear that I'm in the majority of people who go there for nature. And I appreciate how the topography creates such a solitary environment, really. So this is wonderful, and I know Councilmember Penfold, if he knew we were having this discussion, would be quite happy at home. So let's keep this going. Thank you for bringing this to us,
You bet.
and we will see you soon, I hope, for a final approval. Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, Mark, and Kristen. Thank you, Allison, as always. We are going to reschedule or reshuffle our deck here a moment, if you don't mind, because I understand that we have Fraser Bullock with us, which is item 6 on our agenda. And Fraser, yes, Mr. Bullock, if you wouldn't mind coming up, I want to be respectful of your time, and I think we've checked in with Vicki Bennett and Lance that if you wouldn't mind, we're going to put you next. Thank you. Please come on up, and Mayor, thank you for joining us as well.
You're welcome. I think we'll also be joined by another co-chair who is just walking in the door,
Please
Jeff Robbins.
introduce us to anyone and invite them up. Okay. So we are privileged to have an Olympic bid update. And please introduce, Mayor, perhaps you'd like to do some introductions actually instead. As they're getting situated, everybody knows that on February 6th, that Governor Herbert and the legislature unanimously passed a concurrent resolution that supports and encourages the Utah Olympic Exploratory Committee to determine if we are ready, willing, and able to host a future Olympics and Paralympic Winter Games. So thank you for being with us. Mayor, would you like to kick it off?
Today with us, we have two of the co-chairs for the Olympic Exploratory Committee, Fraser Bullock and Jeff Robbins. And they were leading this endeavor on creating this exploratory committee report, of which you are getting a copy of today if you would like one, if you don't already have one. And we'll walk you through kind of the main highlights of the report today and some next steps.
Wonderful.
Great, thank you. And I want to introduce Darren Hughes, who worked with Team 2002 and has consulted for every Olympic organizing committee since 2002. So he is the world's guru and helped write a lot of this report. And so we appreciate him and Jeff and the Sports Commission. A lot of people did great work. So the first thing we want to do is move this slide forward, which it's not going to do. But Everybody remembers the closing scene, I hope, from opening ceremonies, a very special time that we had in the state. And we're stuck. Just the down arrow. Try that. No, it's not. It's working here, but not there.
Well, shucks. Perhaps we have some other IT folks who can help us.
Well, while they're working on that,
It is in our packets.
you have a packet, so we'll talk through it. So, first of all, we want to remember 2002, and why did we do this in the first place? It was an incredible success from every measure. One of the great things that, how many of you experienced the Olympics here and spent some time downtown? When I would come to Salt Lake City, I saw everybody unified, this energy around the city. People were out, visitors from 83 countries. It was an incredible time where our city came alive as I think never before. And so creating that energy, that unity where we all came together to host the world was something very special, and the opportunity to do that again, to raise our city to that level was so exciting, where we all felt one and working together for that common purpose. So it was a special time. Downtown Salt Lake City was just incredible. Now, one notable IOC Vice President, Jean-Claude Keeley, who's an Olympic legend, won 3 gold medals in alpine skiing, said, "Salt Lake, we will always remember you. These were perfect games." They turned out so well. So many people came together. The citizenry of Utah, the best volunteers in the history of the Olympics, we had about 26,000 volunteers, did an absolute fabulous job. So we had, our operations were nearly flawless, and we had a surplus of $100 million. Now, in today's Olympic world, getting a surplus at all is not likely. I think Pyeongchang spent like $11 billion, some big number like that. And so it's very challenging to make profits in today's Olympic world. We did it. We can do it again. You'll remember our games were 4.5 months after 9/11. So we were able to bring the world together and heal the world to get in such a unique way at that time. And Salt Lake City and Utah were branded around the world as a tremendous Olympic success with great people and a beautiful environment. That was our brand post-games. It was very special and created kind of this wave of economic activity that continued post-games. And a recent study that was completed, we had an economic impact of over $6 billion to the state. So from every measure, it was very successful. So why host again? Why should we go through all this effort? Well, number one, it brings the world together under the umbrella of sport. We have the opportunity to unify the world in a unique way, the only way it really gets pulled together, as we just saw in Pyeongchang. Second of all, Utahns enthusiastically support the prospect of hosting the games again, and Jeff and his office, and I'll have him talk about that in a moment, incredible support across the state. They remember. And what's interesting, you go to places like Innsbruck, Austria, the majority don't want the games. Here we love them because we understand it and what it did for our community. Next is another reason for hosting is we believe, and this has been done by the economic people, policy people, believe that there's another opportunity to generate an economic impact of over $6 billion. And then finally, we have a distinct advantage versus any city in the entire world to host the games again. Number one is we have a full set of operating venues that are at world-class levels. You don't see that anywhere else. You see pictures of the crumbling venues in Rio or in Greece or in other places. Here, they are in full world-class shape. Number two, very uniquely, we have an experienced team, which means we don't have to spend time and effort and wasted resources on trying to figure things out. We've got the same team that can work on it, people like Darren, who are even more experienced than before. That saves a lot of cost and activity. Number three is we have a unique, compact geography. You go to Pyeongchang, you have to go from Seoul, a 2.5-hour train ride to get to, from Seoul to Pyeongchang. Same thing in Vancouver, same thing Torino. We've been to all these places. Here you have one games. It's in one place. You can go see freestyle skiing in the morning, and then you can come back and see speed skating in the afternoon, and then you can go to Vivint Arena and see Apollo Ono.
Mr. Bullock, may I interrupt you?
Yes.
Because you're missing one point on here, which is that we're going to have a brand new, incredible international airport, fully built and operational, well in time for these Olympics.
Now that is such a great point. We actually, in the report, we're going to leave you copies, is that we talk about in 2002, we did a great job. But now you look at our state and we're so much better, or will be better with that airport, which the scale of the games has grown. And so we need that larger airport, and it's going to be the most beautiful airport in the country. So thank you for bringing that up. The other thing that we have is we have an experience of hosting hundreds of sporting events, including World Cups and World Championships, and Jeff and his organization are big proponents and make that happen. And so we've continued the legacy from 2002. In fact, next year we're going to have some of the World Championships here, and we continue that effort. Now let's talk about going forward. So what's going on today? There is a process that started in September. This is the timeline for the IOC in your packets. And the 2026 selection process is underway. But let me be very clear. We are not focused on 2026 at all. It is all 2030. The reason for that is LA has 2028. They have exclusive marketing rights through basically 2027. And so to participate, we have to be focused on 2030. So you ask, well, why are we in the 2026 process? The IOC may do a dual award of 26 and 30 at the same time, which is what they just did for 28 and 24 with Paris and with LA. So we need to be in that process. And the U.S. Olympic Committee just sent a letter, which we were thrilled to see happen. We had a lot of dialogues in the background to see happen that they would like to participate in this process. So we're thrilled for that. The door is open now that we weren't sure was going to be open. It's open, we can focus. But their message and our message is 2030. Now the process is, this phase that started last September goes through September of this year, and that's called an informal dialogue stage. Now what that means is you can talk, you can participate with no big commitments, but then in October, they will select a group of cities that become formal candidates to host in 26 or 30. And so they'll narrow down the list. The U.S. Olympic Committee will have to put forward just one candidate. And so that's a very big milestone. A lot of work has to be done between now and then to be selected as the USOC's candidate, and the work we have to do with the IOC between now and then. Then that last year is a candidature process that will be focused on 26 and 30, and the award will be made in September of 2019. Now, that's the IOC. With the U.S. Olympic Committee, in terms of the time and process, is that they need to determine, there are 3 cities that are vying for or have expressed interest in 2030: Salt Lake, Denver, and Reno Tahoe. The U.S. Olympic Committee has to come up with a process to select one of those cities. They have not yet defined that process. They've said they will, they'll work through that, and so we should hear in the not too distant future how they plan on doing that. So that's the timeline. Now I want to shift to the OEC report, And number one, the composition of the people that were there. We had representation, obviously, from Mayor Biskupski. She was a key member of that group. She did a lot of work. She read the report very thoroughly and was very helpful in guiding us through this process. Governor Herbert was in, President Niederhauser, Speaker Hughes. So we had the political leadership of the state was very important. We had former Olympians involved who would give us their input. We had business leaders from across the state. Obviously, we had the Utah Sports Commission, the Utah Olympic Legacy Foundation. We had former members of Team 2002. And so we had a broad base of support in putting together this document. And it ended up being about a 140-page document. We'll give you copies at the end. And it outlines not only why Utah is a great host for the games, but also all the operational details. Here's how we would put it together. Here's where we would hold the events. Here's what transportation looks like. Here's what our new airport's going to look like. All the operational components are in here. And in fact, a quote from an IOC member that was relayed to me by Darren, who was in Pyeongchang, said, "No other city has done anything close to this in this 2026-2030 process. We are way ahead of the competition." But why Utah would be a great host? We have the existing venues, we have a great team, and it's the best place to host the Olympic Winter Games. Now, the enthusiasm for hosting again, that's the other element. Not only is it a great place to host the games, but the enthusiasm is throughout the state. And Jeff, why don't you talk about the public poll that you conducted?
Sure. Well, thank you for letting us spend some time today. We did a poll. One thing we wanted to do was look at were the citizens interested in hosting the games again if we have an opportunity. So Dan Jones, many of you know, a longtime pollster here, did a poll. 89% in a plus or minus 4% poll statewide. Now, when we talked to Dan after, he said, you know, it might have been a little higher than that. He said, and if we waited till the Olympics that just were over, we think it probably would have been 92 or 93% because of the bubble you would have gotten. So it's a good poll. It was done in November. We were in Pyeongchang. We took a delegation there, and they did a terrific job, but it was not like Salt Lake. Nothing's like Salt Lake, right? We did the best job that's ever been done. And so they did a great job, different feel, like Fraser said, not compact games. But there's no question the enthusiasm to host another games is there if we get an opportunity. I think when we talked about the economic impact, I used to be on the Tourism Council for 10 years. When you look at social media, what it's doing now, when you look at the other elements that weren't there in 2002, when you look at the ability to promote the state, the city, all of these different entities, and the platform that now provides us to accomplish a lot of things, not just have people come here, but position Utah and Salt Lake City and our other cities in a way for sustainability, for environmental, other kinds of things. There's a postcard to do something much, much different than the games in 2002, but there's no question, there's enthusiasm, that as Dan Jones told me when I talked to him, he said, this is really a mandate. He said, if you're a politician, which I'm glad you guys are doing that and I'm not, he said this would be known as a mandate. So most cities are struggling. We know that a lot of the international cities are not voting in favor of hosting them. And you start looking down the list, we've had over 700 sporting events since the games, generating $1.5 billion is our estimate. Hundreds of millions of hours of TV with those games, or since the games. So the benefits, and the other thing that's interesting, Fraser, that we talked about, you might ask, well, why is the economic impact going to be about the same next time as it was last time? Well, you got to remember we had a construction bubble. So in the 90s, we had a construction bubble where we had a lot of construction going on. That's been largely done. There will be very little construction needed, especially in terms of venues and related infrastructure. So there will be an economic impact of about the same. You just aren't getting that bubble you did back in the 90s of economic impact and building that took place. So that's why the economic impact, at least the forecast that Natalie and her team did, and they were terrific, is about the same economic impact. And the media value, we can't even put a number on that. We think with social media, all of the other things that are going on right now, the image building and the marketing and the promotion will be, you know, we don't even know how high that will be, but it'll be significantly higher. So those are a few data points,
Great.
Fraser, that maybe dovetail into your slide there.
Excellent. Not only do we have support from the people, we have support from the legislature, unanimous concurrent resolution, and they just voted in the winter sport venues fund to support the venues going forward. So support is strong everywhere.
And I think that's the only place in the nation, in the U.S., that a fund like that exists. So when you think about, are we progressive in the marketplace? Are we doing things that other places are not doing? We've not seen that happen anywhere else.
Great point. Now, let's talk about the budget. Everybody worries about numbers. And so we estimated, now, we went back through our budget, which was about 600 pages from 2002. We had every penny detailed. And we went through it, and we estimated this time around, on a conservative basis for revenues, in today's dollars, we'd be about $1.353 billion. Now, let me, on the revenue side, the reason I say that's conservative, because we want to keep a low budget with upside to it. That contemplates $260 million of domestic sponsorships. Last time we did over 700 million in today's dollars. So we can do far better than that 260 million, but we've got LA back to back with us, and so we have to work through that. And is our market potential of sponsorship going to be diminished? So we came in with the lowest number we could sponsorship-wise and still break even, but saying there's a lot of upside beyond that, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. So our expenses come in at 1.35 billion, but that includes a $60 million contingency, and it includes a $63 million endowment for Utah Sport, both the Utah Sport Commission and the Utah Olympic Legacy Foundation. Now, what if there's a surplus? What do we do with that? Number one is any surplus has to be agreed to with the U.S. Olympic Committee. They control this country, and so anything we do has to be worked through with them. One of the things we'd want to do is increase that $63 million endowment to keep sport active here in the state. One of the reasons we are able to get the Olympics back, as we think a favorite, is because our venues are so well maintained and we continue to have the events. Those two in combination qualify us to host for the Olympics again. And we want to perpetuate that, so we would take that number up. The other thing that we have in the report is that we would like to endow a fund for developing U.S. Olympians, notably many of whom train here in Utah. And the U.S. government, because the U.S. government in the United States does not fund athletes for the Olympics. In almost every other country they do, so we're at a distinct disadvantage. We saw the poor performance of athletes in Pyeongchang, of U.S. athletes, and right now, the national governing bodies of sports struggle for money. We could make a permanent legacy in perpetuity from Salt Lake and Utah to the Olympic movement in this country by endowing a fund as a little bit of a give back for the positive impact that the Olympics have had in Utah. So that's the budget area, a lot of upside. We're hoping for a surplus. Now, the question is, what's next? At this point in time, we're waiting for direction from the U.S. Olympic Committee. We're continue to be active in the background with the IOC and the USOC with ongoing discussions. But at this point, we need some direction from the USOC in terms of next steps that they're going to have in place to select the U.S. candidate city. So that's a summary of the report. Do you have questions or thoughts or comments?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Bullock. Mr. Robbins, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and you guys know who the candidate cities are in the U.S. because Reno, Tahoe, and Denver are the ones that have been put forward by the USOC as interested cities. And so it'll be interesting comparing a little bit about what Denver has and Reno, Tahoe. They're both great cities, but they don't have all of the venues that we have. They don't have the $3 billion airport that will be built. They don't have light rail. So when you start looking at how we compete from an infrastructure with some of those who are looking to bid again, we compete very, very well. And certainly in our report, the airport and light rail and the things that we've done since the games have been highlighted, and that's a real advantage both from a cost standpoint and from a bid standpoint.
Thank you. Councilmember Luke.
Thank you both. Plus, in addition to what you were talking about, we don't have a history of being awarded the games and then giving it back. And we also don't have the legacy of letting all of the venues go, which Tahoe did. So anyway, I do want to thank you both for all of the work and for all of you for the work that you're doing. I do think that this is an incredible opportunity for the city. I think that because of the work, not only that was done in 2002, but the work that Jeff has continued to do through the Sports Commission, we have demonstrated that not only can we host a successful games, but we can build a successful international sport or legacy of sport, unlike any other previous host. The one thing that I think we lacked, and I've talked with both of you about this before, and I do think that this, bidding again creates a new opportunity, is the fact that Salt Lake City does not have a legacy location or a park. I don't know of any other Olympic host city that doesn't have that. I understand the politics that took place before. That is now passed, and so what I would, be very interested in working not only with the three of you, but with us as a council, is to look at potential locations to build an Olympic park that not only honors what took place in 2002, but continues to honor the ongoing legacy of sport that we have in the city. I do think that it is a unique opportunity. I think with the excitement around this bid, we're in a good position to do that. So I just want to put that out so that we can all start thinking a little bit about that. But thank you both for not only your past work, but your continued work on moving this forward. And please let us know if there is anything that any of us can do as a council or individually as well.
Yeah, maybe,
Right.
first of all, last time, the first time we put on the games, the only thing we were worried about was putting on the games. We didn't want to mess it up. And so that was our focus, but then we had some resources at the end, and we tried to do a few things, as you know. They were not successful. This time around, we have the experience, and so we can have a broader vision. What can we accomplish for the city? How can we unify the city? How can we build something that would be a great legacy for both games? I like that a lot, what you just said. And so we can have a much broader vision, and being able to dialogue with you and think that through would be a wonderful opportunity.
Councilmember Luke has been waving that flag, every pun intended, for the Olympics there as long as I've been on the council, and
I've watched all of the waving of the Olympic flags for a long time.
we're
so I'm
going to
good at
get you
waving the
a
flags.
standard there. But perhaps with I know that the administration's doing work on finding some potential new park space in the downtown area as we so need, and we have been committed to on both sides of the hallway for a long time. So perhaps that conversation can dovetail there. Councilmember Kitchen.
I'm glad you brought up the downtown park, because I was just thinking we have, I think, a million bones on the table for a downtown park already, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. And we also have the Hoberman Arch that is sitting in storage and needs some parts to be fabricated. So we should probably move on getting that fixed up and placed somewhere so that we can continue to build the momentum and the excitement in the community, which obviously is pretty high already. But I was speaking to some colleagues a while back, and we talked about maybe the new airport being a great location for the Hoberman Arch. At entrance exit kind of placement. So just some food for thought there. You mentioned, Fraser, the venues as a selling point for or 2026 or 2030. You call them world-class, which they no doubt are. But I wonder, what condition do you expect them to be in a decade?
That's a great question. We put in an endowment of $76 million from the last games, which allowed the venues to operate, because they operate at a deficit. And there was some maintenance built into that fund, but it was contemplated that after about 15 years, we would start to see some deterioration. And so fortunately, the legislature stepped forward and put $9 million into the fund this year, and there's about $40 million that's going to be needed to keep them at a world-class level between now and 2030. And the commitment or the indication of the legislature is to fund that, which is wonderful. And they made a big statement this year in making a large commitment. So I think we'll be in very good shape in 2030.
Great. How do you imagine the games to be different in 2030 compared to, say, 2002 or even 2018 in Pyeongchang?
Well, several things. Number one, there are some exciting new sports in there, like the snowboard sports and of big air and slope style. And so we'll have new venue experiences and things like that. So we'll have that component in there. We'll have a showcase of the new airport and new infrastructure that's here in Salt Lake. But we'll want to come up with a whole new theme of thinking about what it is we want to communicate to the world. Last time it was Light the Fire Within, which was very inspirational, and we built all of our theming around that of inspiration and things like that. But we would want to invent a new theme, a new games that would bring all the pieces together, and we would share that with you and work through that with you to come up with what's the message we want to send to the world, as well as having superb athletic competition.
Thank you. And one final question. Can you expand a little bit on our community's deficits or the drawbacks? What kinds of investments would we need to make? Substantial investments do we need to make? I think I saw hotel room keys being one, and maybe road or transportation infrastructure. But talk to us about what needs to happen in order for us to be even more competitive.
Well, I think we're in great shape. With the new airport, the key is the new airport coming on stream. With the new airport and the light rail and infrastructure and rail infrastructure that's in place, and the hotel rooms, we have much more than we had before, and we were able to make it work. So I would say anything that's added is just a plus, but we have today, with the new airport, everything we need to be a superb candidate.
Yeah, and some of the interesting things that we can position this city and the state that we couldn't have before, we can say, we've got sustainability. We've got the ability, with this dynamic world we live in and the infrastructure and technology and the changes, there's gaming, there's environmental, there's sustainability, there's what's going to happen with transportation. Self-driving, well, I don't know if the self-driving cars are going to make it after yesterday. I'm not sure that'll be the case, but there's all sorts of things that are going to be taking place. And not only can you position yourself in the public as a leader, you can position yourself with the different vendors and the different people doing it. They want to come and be part of it. They want to be part of this evolution in a place that can help perpetuate that and help it improve it because of the worldwide nature. So there's just tremendous opportunity to say, okay, we've got this, we've got the infrastructure, we've got the venues, we've got a great budget, we've got infrastructure going into the venues and funding, but boy, we've got a really kind of an open mat to draw on and say, what else do we want to be? How else do we want to be positioned? And where can we take advantage of those clusters and leverage them? And I think it's just as much as you can think about and say, what is it we want to do?
Councilmember Fowler.
I was just thinking, and this kind of relates to how we can set ourselves apart and be more competitive. And Councilmember Luke and I were just thinking that perhaps if we bring back ski ballet, then we'll be able to be a little bit more competitive.
Oh, there
That's
we
it.
go. Perfect.
That's the missing
Okay.
piece. Councilmember Wharton, and then Johnston.
What are our competitors? What advantages do you see that they have over us?
None.
We're asking the wrong person for that, aren't we?
These guys are totally unbiased.
I really don't see that they have an advantage other than we hosted in 2002. But that actually gives us a positive advantage because the International Olympic Committee is looking for cities today that have existing venues. They have an effort called Olympic Agenda 2020, and they have something in that called the new norm. And the new norm is they don't want to see these big expenditures on the Olympics. They want to be efficient, they want to be cost efficient, and any other city like Denver, Reno, Tahoe is going to have to spend $500 million plus to build venues that we already have. And so they're at a significant disadvantage, and I'm not aware of any. And the other disadvantage that particularly Denver has is it's a spread out games and the traffic and all the, so I don't see that we have any weaknesses relative to our competition.
And Reno is actually dialoguing with California to even help pull their package together. So that becomes even more convoluted for them.
You know, in Penang, we arrived at the airport. Took us 2.5 hours by train to go to the coastal cluster, they call it, where the speed skating and the speed skating events were, and then another 2.5 hours to the highest venue that they had some of the slope style and snowboard events taking place in Mogul. So if you look at landing at the airport, by the time you got to the top event up in the winter cluster, 5 hours. When you look at the compact games we have here, 60-mile radius, you've got all the venues in 60 miles. You got front runner that we didn't have. You've got infrastructure that we didn't have. So when you start looking at I-70, when you look going up to Tahoe, Reno from, Tahoe from Reno, the transportation infrastructure is not the same. So I think we measure up on almost all fronts really, really well.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I might be the wet blanket here. I'm apologize in advance. I love the Olympics, watching them. My question is, I see the budget presented. Do you have a sense of how much the federal government have to pay for security costs if we were to do it in 10 years?
Yeah, security costs per Presidential Decision Directive 62, the Secret Service is in charge and the federal government is in charge of special events. The estimate for last time was $240 million for 2002. It's probably going to be a bigger number just because of the terrorist issues that are around. But they are, in my experience of working with all the federal agencies, they are incredibly capable, incredibly supportive, and this is what they're trained to do.
You believe that the 2-year turnaround from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City could be managed through some partnerships and other things. Is there any precedent for that anywhere we've seen?
Not really. What I see is a massive advantage of LA to Salt Lake. One of the big things that they'll do is they'll buy a bunch of stuff. One example, a gazillion TVs, because they go everywhere. At the end of the games, they sell those for almost nothing. We'll take them. And so there are all kinds of resources and assets that they would otherwise dispose of with pennies on the dollar that we could have a pre-arrangement to take those. Also a transfer of people. There are a lot of people who are operational, who are at the games, and we need them about a year, year and a half out. We could take them over. So one of the things that we want to explore is cutting new ground, so to speak, of collaborating with them on every dimension of hosting, not only for cost efficiency, but also potentially for revenue generation. Back-to-back games could be very, very positive for some sponsors. Instead of just a 17-day event, well, it's 2 years.
Your conservative revenue estimate was based on not getting as many sponsorships based on the 2-year turnaround and have much time with those sponsors. Is that accurate?
It was actually a plug.
Okay.
It was a plug based on here's our cost. So we built up our cost budget first.
Mm-hmm.
We know pretty much what all the other revenue items are. They're actually told to us by the IOC with their. So this is a plug. And we said, okay, we need $260 million to break even. We could raise that in Utah. And there's a huge upside beyond that. Could we do $750 million? Maybe. But that number we have in there is a plug. We think there's tremendous upside beyond that.
Okay. But we can only do exclusive rights post LA games. Is that what we understand?
There are two ways. That is a really key question.
Okay.
Because this is a big part of our revenue budget. There are two ways to approach that. One is we can start selling sponsorships in January of 2027. We can't activate those sponsorships until right after the LA Games. So we'll have like an 18-month, 20-month runway on those sponsorships, which is decent. But we will have a 3-year window, or 3-year window to be able to sell sponsorships because we can sell them starting then.
Okay.
The other thing we could do is collaborate with LA and say, why don't we do some joint marketing for some large sponsors and see if we can enhance their revenues as well as enhance our revenues far in advance of the 2027 timeframe.
You know, and the proximity to LA is really good. I mean, the IOC, the USOC, all of the partners have every motivation to have us get along well with LA if we get a 2030 games, because you can leverage. So I think if you look at the sponsorship number, it's low. I mean, I think it would be higher realistically. But I think the message of what the budget is today versus what it was in 2002 and how it compares to the other potential competitors and other U.S. is really, really compelling. But they have a vested interest, IOC, the USOC, that if we have a 2030 games, LA, Salt Lake works well together and tries to create as much synergy as possible to generate as much revenue as we can and to have successful games.
Okay.
And our ability to raise money locally is not prohibited. Is that correct?
Well, we would have to get permission from them to, but that's, Mayor, that's exactly a key point that we want to execute on. We would go to LA. I've already been there, talked to them. We would go to them and say, we would like to be able to raise money in Utah from corporations who otherwise wouldn't sponsor LA and start that early. And I think that's a possibility.
Okay. I think the only thing I'd ask, if you have a second, have you seen anything
Just
out of
a
the
second.
2020 initiative from IOC? Is there anything being put in place that we can see as tangible results, or the commitment to sort of, in their selection process, not go for the high cost? Is there anything else that we could look at?
Yes, it's actually in the report. It's in one of the sections here. It talks about utilizing existing venues, cost effective. I'm actually on the working group of the IOC that's working on this issue. I was in Lausanne last November, so I know exactly, and I'm helping prepare their work on that, and they actually published it in the end of January, was it? It's actually a public document, and it's out there.
Yeah, you can search that, and even it'll bring up their IOC document as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members, for your discussion. Thank you, Fraser Bullock, Jeff Robbins, Darren in the back there, Mayor.
Yes.
This is exciting. Your passion and enthusiasm is palpable, and I love having passionate people before us to talk about opportunities to the city. We will look to learn more about how the city will be engaged. Let's just speak in the positive format here. And the September 2019 timeline is not too far off. It's very exciting. So let us know how we can help as a city council, as the legislative body here, and what our involvement may be as that development occurs. Thank you for your time and being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, my peers, we are quite behind. So at this point, we're going to jump back to our consolidated fee schedule amendment for sanitation special event fees. It's item 5. And we have it slated for 10 minutes. Let's try to keep it to 10 minutes or less. And then to our, we'll go to, as they're coming up, we're going to go to, obviously, to the wastewater reclamation facility local limits item next and keep that to 15 minutes. And then on the interlocal agreement with the DA's office, if we can keep that to 15 minutes as well. And the CCAC report. Vicki and Lance and our wonderful Lehua, welcome.
Hi.
Lehua, do you want to start us off here, please?
Sure. Council members probably remember that when this briefing was first held in February, there were some concerns raised about the cost for special events in the city. And so council members asked us to explore some options and come back to you with those. And Vicki and Lance can speak a little bit more to this, but in their outreach with the special event organizers, it really became clear that the concern is not just about waste fees and that piece of the cost of doing the events in the city, but really just the holistic concern about the continual increase to the cost of city services. And so there are a few options in your staff report that council members may want to explore. There are a few options that would be temporary, that would allow either the fees to not be implemented right away or to be phased in to make those easier for special events. And then maybe that could be paired with a legislative intent or a request for a broader briefing to come back to the council and explore those options later in the year. We've asked both the city's finance department and the city attorney's office about the issue of using the revenues, continuing to cover this as a subsidy, so to speak, because the waste and recycling collection is an enterprise fund. There's always a caution about whether you're collecting the fees through user rates and then how you're using them to benefit those customers. In this situation, and I think you guys talked about this a bit during your first briefing, these are revenues coming from residential customers paying for waste and recycling collection, and then it's subsidizing this activity at special events. And so from the perspective of how long you would want to continue doing that, I've heard from council members and from the administration the concern about keeping the fees going towards the customers who are paying them, and so there would not be any desire to have that fund balance continue to subsidize the special events for a long period of time, but there's nothing saying that it has to be an immediate fix either. And so if the council is interested in any of the temporary options in the staff report, there are no legal or financial concerns with doing that on a temporary basis.
Thank you. Vicki?
I think Lahua did a wonderful job covering it. I feel at a disadvantage going from the Olympics to garbage fees.
Waste.
And waste. But yeah, and we did get it, our attorney's opinion was that for a short time, the subsidy would be fine. Longer time, we would be, having to really consider the legal issues. And it is something that Waste and Recycling would like to continue to do, because from the bit of input we've gotten from the private sector, we're able to do it for a much lower fee, and that would be to the advantage of our special events. So Lance did speak to a number of the events, almost all of them.
We did. So as per council's direction, we reached out to all the events either and met with them face to face, or we via email had a lot of dialogue with all the events. The overarching message that we heard from all the events, obviously they don't like an increase in the fees. That was obvious. Many of the events, especially the larger ones, did reach out to the private sector to gauge what the rates were. And the two things came back. One, everybody agreed that it'd be a lot more expensive if they went with the private sector choice. The number two thing, which made me feel good, was they did not believe that they would get the level of service that they actually receive from the city right now if they did go to the private sector. So there was then all the discussion really was around the ACE fund, how that was being used, or the options of that. Discussing a lot of the other fees that was increasing, really the larger impact to the events, and then the ongoing discussion, quite frankly, has been about how they're going to maybe some of the opportunities to reduce costs, so where they right-size the services or change things like that. I was actually quite surprised with the reception that we had with all the events and the emails that we received from them in support. So I mean, that's all I can say. Really, there is a concern about the fees that they're facing, and the way that these events are structured financially. They have to actually commit to costs that they don't know if they can cover in order to get people there, sponsors there. So I think I elaborate a little bit more in the summary that I provided the council, but if there's any questions about anything I heard.
Thank you. Councilmember Fowler.
First, I just want to say thank you for following up with some of these questions that we had at the last meeting. And I think more than anything, what you found out is what I've heard through talking with some of the event people. But I think it also raises another question, that it's not so much about what the waste fee is, but overall what the fee for having an event on the city grounds here are, right? And so I think this needs to be a broader policy discussion that I would like to ask the board, the council to consider putting on an agenda. Because I think that there's ways, I think this is just one tiny little part that brought to light kind of all of the other things that the festivals and the events are feeling based around the entire fee structure for having an event here and what that looks like. So, I appreciate it, and I to your credit, I heard very positive things about interactions with your department, and that they recognize that it was much cheaper than going private, but it does then, like I said, kind of raise that extra kind of bigger concern of the overall fees. So just throwing that out there, that I think it's something that we need to discuss, and we've kind of discussed this as a council of, is this the right place to have festivals? Is this kind of looking at the area as a whole and what we want it here, what would happen if those festivals ended up leaving here, and if we cared very much about it. So I think it's just one of those things that I think we need to have on an agenda at some point to really dive into those policy discussions. So thank you for coming back with that information. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Councilmember Fowler. Anybody else?
I just have a follow-up to Councilmember Fowler, and that is just, how do our fees stack up to other municipalities' fees for events?
So that's kind of, there's very few municipalities in the state that actually provide their own collection services. I think Ogden, Provo, Draper, and Salt Lake are the ones that could come to mind. And so when you look at what they do, I can't speak for all of them, but from my knowledge, they pretty much put it out to private sector to provide those services. And they have either through an RFP process that they choose a preferred vendor that provides those services, or they require the events to go directly to those.
So there isn't any other municipality that we can really measure off of?
Not to my knowledge, not to that level. There may be one-offs, but not to the extent that we provide for those services.
I think that when we go through the budget process and we go through fees, and I'd like to see actually some data showing what other events cost around the state, other municipalities.
Just to clarify, overall event costs, or, we only have control over the waste?
No, just sanitation.
Just the san, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Johnston, then Wharton.
I like showing the true cost of services. I know it gets expensive, especially when you're not used to seeing the true cost of a service, and I like the fact that we're going to identify what is actually needed for that service versus being subsidized by everyone. I am open to the idea of delaying a year or something along those lines to ensure time to plan for budgets for the following year for events and those kind of things. So I'd be in favor of that.
Councilmember Wharton.
I just also wanted to speak in favor of that. I think that we need at least a year to identify how this is going to impact our events, and be able to talk through whether, if they determine that this will make it so that they're not able to have an event in Salt Lake, is that worth the cost? So I would advocate for the delay.
Okay. To wrap up then, it sounds like I'm going to look for a motion based on, there's a few straw poll-ish options that I'd like someone to make an option on around delaying. I would like us to be less specific about 1 year and more like maybe as soon as possible, but I don't want to push it to a year if we don't need to. I don't want to rush staff to do it in 2 months either while we're doing the budget. so that we can schedule an opportunity for a broader policy discussion based on Councilmember Fowler's good comments. And James talked about looking at data from sanitation event costs in other cities in the county, perhaps, or along the Wasatch Front. James? Okay. Can I get a straw poll?
Oh,
please.
Did you want me to make the motion first?
Yes.
Or was that you doing it?
No,
Okay.
I'd like someone else to.
Okay. I would move that we do a straw poll for delaying increase in the rate to a time of not more than a year, but hopefully less, to have a policy discussion about the impacts on our events, but to delay for an uncertain amount of time, but not more than a year.
So, if I understand correctly, the max amount of time we delay would be a year?
Correct.
But it could be less time we delay?
That is right.
Wouldn't that be more difficult for people trying to organize, not knowing that it might get increased before a year?
I think that would have to be, I would say that would have to be part of our considerations when we determine, like, we're gonna have to balance not putting this on the agenda in the next 2 months because of budget with giving them enough of a runway of notice. So I'm just saying, I don't want to put 6 months on it if it's going to take 4 or 7.
Councilmember Fowler?
Can I make a suggestion that we kind of split this into 2 straw polls, in that one would simply answer the question of delaying the full rate increase by a year, which, to be fair, most of the events happen in the summertime. So then, we would be, and then the second straw poll, so we're teasing this out a little bit, would be to have a policy discussion sometime after the budget, sometime later in this year. Does that make?
And for a little more clarity, the policy discussion is to look at the total costs incurred by special events.
Correct.
And just as a point, when the events start doing their planning and we first start working with them, generally is in about February to March, because they're all doing their planning for the year. So that's why this came to you separately rather than just part of the budget, is we would like to have a set event, whatever the fees are, for kind of the event year versus the fiscal year. So that just is a timing matter. If we could have something assured by
Before February.
next, yeah.
The
That would
council
probably be best.
could approve the ordinance and change to the consolidated fee schedule with an effective date of January 1st, 2019. And then it's not quite a year, but it meets this need that Vicki just raised. And then it also would coincide with the ACE funding availability for special events for the city. And so depending on how it all goes with
But we could revisit that in September, for example, after we've kind of gone through budget season and looked at all of the fees, and then we could revisit that. And in September, if we are okay with the fee raise, have an ordinance that went into effect in January, so that at least we're giving them 6 months to say, before you start really fully getting into your budget cycle, you'll know that there's an increased fee.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple different straw polls. What do we want to do?
I will withdraw mine in favor of Councilmember Fowler's and second hers.
Will you restate the first one that we delay, but then Lehua said we adopt? So what do you want to do? We can,
Sorry, maybe this makes more sense. Maybe we just delay, what month are we in, March? 6 months to revisit this? Just the portion of the waste fee.
well, we have before us the consolidated fee schedule amendment, which is just this portion. So we can't, there's nothing else to delay, is my understanding. And I think that it it's probably smart of us to go till January 1 and give that much time. That way it's still in my purview to put it on the agenda, that we'll get to it before that, which is requisite upon the work that is yet to come around looking holistically at the costs incurred by special events. But it sounds like we have a commitment to work on that. So are you looking for a straw poll that we would support adoption of the consolidated fee schedule amendment with a delayed implementation date of January 1, 2019? Councilmember Rogers?
I'll second it.
Okay, we've got a straw poll. Everybody understand it? Adoption with delayed implementation.
January 1st.
January 1, 2019. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? One nay. Councilmember Wharton. Okay, and did you want to make any other special or straw polls?
My other straw poll would just be that we get some information regarding the fees that events pay in total, and it kind of goes back to what what we talked about at that other meeting, but as we look at the economic impact in paying those fees on events and what the economic impact would be to the city if they left.
So perhaps we could just straw poll to ask staff to work with the administration to come back to us with a more holistic understanding of the costs of special events and or balanced with the impacts to our community, the positive impacts or negative, whatever.
I'm confident that we can provide what events are paying, and depending on how that changes and what money is available from the city through grants or other sponsorships that offset the community impact and an economic analysis on what would happen if, I feel less confident that we would have that available, but we can check. So I don't want to set unfair expectations. So we'll check more on that and then come back.
And there's some quantitative aspects of how many visitors come to festivals and
Perfect. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Things as that. Okay, so we've got a straw poll to ask staff to work with the administration on that complete package for us to consider. Costs to special events and whether or not we feel that they should be subsidized ultimately for the benefit to the community. Second on your straw poll? We don't need to? Great. Who's in favor? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. You're opposed again. Councilmember Wharton. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, mostly because I was reading something and I didn't hear what it was restated, and so I didn't want to vote for something that I didn't know what was said. Sorry.
Understood.
I might not actually be against it. I just got distracted.
Okay. Thank you, Lance, Vicky, Lahua. We're just over 15 minutes on that one. Good job. We're actually, are we able to reschedule our wastewater reclamation facility item, or are we going ahead with it?
Yes, I confirmed with Director Briefer that we could do it on April 3rd.
Thanks, and our apologies to Director Briefer for that. We have a full agenda today, so that takes us to item 8, the interlocal agreement for locating the Salt Lake City Prosecutor's Office and the District Attorney's Office with the county. So we should have Jennifer Bruno come up here with us. Of course, our District Attorney Sim Gill. Welcome, Margaret Plain. Many other people in suits.
Well, I was motioning to one, but I got a thumbs up. And we can also switch off so the microphones work. I don't have any.
I know we have met before, but please reintroduce yourselves to me and our public, the many, many people viewing this at home.
Valerie Wild, managing the City Prosecutor's Office.
Thank you.
Scott Fisher, I'm a First Assistant City Prosecutor in the Salt Lake City Prosecutor's Office.
Thank you.
Sim Gill, Salt Lake County District Attorney and also Salt Lake City Prosecutor.
Thank you.
And I'm Margaret Plain, still the Salt Lake City Attorney. Thank you for inviting us up. We're really here to answer your questions. I was sort of asked to give a big picture introduction because the majority of the council wasn't here in 2015 when the interlocal agreement regarding the district attorney's management of our prosecutor's office was initiated. And then I think we'll probably turn it over to Scott Fisher because he's a city employee with 20 plus years with the prosecutor's office and has a really great perspective on how this is all working. So big picture is that in fall of 2015, the current interlocal agreement became effective. The interlocal agreement is for the DA to manage the prosecutor's office. We call it the Management Services Agreement. So it's been in effect for about 2.5 years. Under that agreement, we've got city employees enforcing city ordinances, working with Salt Lake City police officers in Salt Lake City Court. So they're still our employees, they're still enforcing our ordinances, they're still working with our law enforcement, and they're doing it in the Salt Lake City Justice Court. They file under city headers because, of course, meaning the caption says Salt Lake City versus, because they're still city employees, and Sim Gill has been deputized as our city prosecutor. The collaboration was entered into, it started being evaluated in about 2014, and it was entered into to gain some cost efficiencies for the city. Also because we believed we could improve the administration of justice through this collaboration. At the time, the legislature was considering what became the JRI, the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. And one of the things JRI did was change some things like simple drug possession charges from felonies to misdemeanors. And so at the time, we weren't sure what the impact would be on our caseload, and we thought collaborating with the DA's office would help with the administration of justice under JRI. So that was one thing going on. So we wanted to save money. JRI was sort of changing the way we were looking at the administration of justice. And then we also were interested in perhaps providing a better opportunity for our city employees in terms of advancement to more complicated prosecutions within the office if they wanted it. I'm just going to hit some highlights of what's been accomplished because I think it's covered both in the transmittal and in your council staffers' council report. But one highlight is that each year this arrangement has saved close to 10%, and some years more than that, of the budget as it stood in 2015. So that's not intuitive to see because one of the things we did with the reorganization realignment was to eliminate some positions that became duplicative. So when that money drops out of the budget, you don't see it every year as an ongoing savings because it's just gone that first year. But the efficiencies and the savings from that amount to close to 10% of the prosecutor's budget annually. And in other years, they've saved over $100,000, which this is about a $2.83 million budget. So those are real numbers.
So your budget is 2.38 million, is that what you said?
I said between 2.8 and 3 million for the prosecutor's budget. I believe it was about 2.8 million in 2015 when the agreement was initiated.
But when you're talking about the city saving 10%, that's your budget, right?
It's part of the city attorney's budget. My budget is complicated, which is why I specified, because I have some risk management, the prosecutor's office, the recorder's office, and then the core civil budget. So in the budget book, for instance, the city attorney's budget is close to 12.5 million. The prosecutor's piece of that is
roughly 3.
Yeah, it's just under 3. Quickly, one thing that did happen as a result of JRI was that Class A misdemeanors increased. And these guys can talk a lot more about that, but I just want to point out that under the agreement, the district attorney's office agreed to handle all Class A cases. I said Class A misdemeanors, sorry, Class A felonies. No, misdemeanors, sorry. Those increased, and they agreed to handle all of those. Because the city was no longer responsible for those, and they could be absorbed into the county's workload, we didn't have to hire additional people to manage those. And I think that's another savings that you don't see, but a real win for, I think, everyone in terms of efficiency of the administration of justice. So quickly, why are we here? The current interlocal agreement terminates in June of 2018. There are two one-year renewal provisions that are automatic. So the timing is good. Furthermore, the DA's new building, as you all have seen across the street, is now occupied by county employees, and we're coming to you with a request for an amended and restated interlocal that would allow us to co-locate. Co-locating, we believe, will bring increased efficiencies and ongoing improved opportunities, not just for our city employees, but for our city employees working together with the county employees. So that's why we're here, because there's a resolution being proposed with the interlocal agreement. And really, this sort of initially was teed up as a budget amendment. The good news is that if council approves this direction of continuing the management agreement while also co-locating, there are no additional costs in the prosecutor's budget for fiscal year 18. In other words, they have enough savings that we can move and cover the rent and operating costs for the remainder of this fiscal year. But of course, in the new ongoing fiscal years, there is the additional cost because we're going to be leasing space for 29 employees in the new DA's building. The offset of that, of course, is that we're freeing up the 5th floor of Plaza 349. Patrick is here, and he can certainly talk to you about the space constraints that the administration is experiencing. So I'm going to stop talking because I think Scott is really the person you should be hearing from, unless you have questions for me. But questions may be generated by what Scott is here.
Go ahead, Scott, thanks.
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. So I've been in the Salt Lake City Prosecutor's Office now 23 years. I'm one of 2 first assistant city prosecutors. I'd like to acknowledge Paige Williamson, who's another first assistant city prosecutor. She's been with the city prosecutor's office now for 17 years. And she and I have talked, and so the 2 of us are in agreement with the comments I'm going to relay to you. One thing I do want to point out is in those 23 years, I've had the opportunity to work for Cheryl Luke, who was a chief city prosecutor. After Cheryl, I worked for Sim as a chief city prosecutor. I then worked for Padma Vero Collins as a chief city prosecutor, and now for a second time, I'm working under Sim as the chief city prosecutor. Based on that experience and my familiarity with, and Paige's familiarity with the day-to-day operations in the office, I think that Salt Lake City should be confident about this opportunity. This is a limited time, basically once in 20 or 30 years opportunity. I think we need to recognize the situation for what it is and take the opportunity now before it passes us by and is lost. And that would be mine and Paige's request. The ability to interact with DA, district attorney personnel on a daily, moment-by-moment, face-to-face basis will improve the quality of justice for victims, defendants, Salt Lake City residents, Salt Lake City Police, the Salt Lake City Justice Court, and have a positive ripple effect for every agency and person involved in Salt Lake City and county justice systems. And in my thinking, that would include the defense bar. This is a situation where 1 + 1, our office and the DA's office, does not just equal 2. This is a situation where 1 + 1 = 3. There's a synergistic effect here. And we've seen that under the contract already, and I think that the opportunity to share space will magnify that impact. We've seen great opportunities and I think great gains in the ability to lessen some of the complications where we have cases that fall on the cusp between the district attorney's office and our office. For example, a case could be presented to the district attorney's office as a felony. And it might be a possible felony, but perhaps it's better suited to be treated as a misdemeanor and come to our office. The flip side of that is that sometimes Class Bs, an example would be DUIs, will come into our office and you look at them and they should be enhanced based on priors. In those situations, it comes into an initial office, someone makes a decision, it's got to go to the other office, and it starts this sequence of bouncing cases back and forth that delays filing, delays screening, and delays getting the cases into court. Now, we've already seen an improvement in that under the contract. The opportunity to share space where literally the city prosecutors, yes ma'am?
I was going to let you finish your sentence.
Okay.
But Councilmember Fowler had a question on something you've said.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just, I wanted to get it in directly related while you were talking about it because, so I didn't forget. You mentioned that you, and I am very, very familiar with the system.
Sure.
But, so I'll give that as a little bit of a preface first.
Okay.
The screening process, right? Are you suggesting then that there would be simply one screening department for both city ordinances and state statutes? Because that sort of in this idea of now we don't have to bounce it back and forth between offices seems to suggest that there would be one screening process. I mean, technically, even if you're in the same building, you would have to still bounce it back and forth between offices. So is it easier because now you just have to walk down the hallway, or will this end up morphing? Because I have a concern with it ending up morphing into one screening.
It will be two separate screening units. So for example, there will be a city screening unit and city prosecutors and a DA screening unit. The advantage to this is we will be on the same floor of the same building. We will literally be able to walk across that space and share ideas. If we've got a case we've got a concern about, go and talk about it with the DA's office. So for example, I can give you examples. One that comes to mind is one I'm dealing with currently, and that is we have a DA case where they're trying to figure out a way to get it out of district court and get it into Judge Baxter's vet court. And so we've been throwing emails and phone calls back and forth. In this scenario, I can either walk across the building, go talk to someone face to face, or maybe walk upstairs and have that real-time, face-to-face conversation about how to solve a problem. So we're not merging our screening function. What it is, it's the ability to share information, and in these kinds of situations where they have created this bounce back between agencies, we're going to be able to shorten the time frame. There'll be discrete screening units. They will not, the DA's office will have their screening unit, and we will have ours.
I mean, I understand that these, oftentimes you're talking with the DA's office anyway, as is. But again, walking across the hall to share ideas does raise a concern for me because we have separate ordinances versus separate state statutes. And it does sound a lot more like it would morph. You certainly, I mean, no offense, but the offices are not very far away from each other. I'm pretty sure there's an ability to make a meeting and have face-to-face time now, as is. And technology allows us to send emails back and forth. So I mean, it does raise some concerns for me. And part of the concern is, no offense, Sim, but you may decide not to be the DA for the rest of our lives here, right? And so what happens if there has now become a community of this morphine, and where maybe city ordinances are not in the same line as state statutes, and we don't have Sim who's kind of philosophically aligned with maybe the city, right? And now we've already merged these because it seems inevitable that that would happen. If I'm sitting across the hallway from Charlie and we're sharing ideas, and it seems inevitable that those ideas will start to morph together. And so that raises a very big concern for me.
I think the idea here is that if you think about it, we have state statutes for misdemeanor offenses and the unique city ordinances, which are often with our sexually oriented businesses, our zoning issues, land, those kind of housing issues, kind of issues that we have in code enforcement. I think what Scott is really talking about is that when we have those issues which may fall into our shop or into this shop, the effectiveness of it, although we have technology and we can set up meetings, we often have officers who come down to that building, then they go to that building, and then we try to bring people together. This is literally saying, hey, this really belongs in the city, that we shouldn't prosecute this. Hey, Scott, can you take a look at this? Would you screen this as a city case? And Scott looks at it, reads it, and he says, yeah, we can file it as a Class B misdemeanor. Great, we won't have to file it as a felony. that is literally a 30-second, 40-second issue. And once we decide what it is, instead of the police officer having to come to 2 different places to pick the file, take it back for screening over there, the officer comes once. Or sometimes the officers, they will generate a report and we don't know where it's going to fall. And we can have a single meeting with a city prosecutor and a DA, and they can look at it and say, you know what, this is really a felony, it's not a misdemeanor, and we can make that decision right there, or take it down. That to me is the value of collaboration, and I don't think we should worry about that, and I don't think we're going to lose any identity, because when it comes to city and code enforcement, there's only a single SOB license. The state doesn't have a scheme for that. And when the officers are looking at those ordinances, which are city-specific ordinances, those are going to be dictated by the law that we have. I appreciate the concern that you're raising, but I don't think it is so fatal, or it would rise to the level where we would simply lose our identity of what is unique to the city. And I appreciate your kindness to say, you know, yes, I may not be here forever. But having said that, the question really is one of fiscal sense, organizational sense, and operational sense. And is it giving value to our community with this agreement? And are we finding value to our citizens? And is it giving us opportunities through this synergy? For example, take Operation Rio Grande, where the focus has been on arrest and felony prosecution. Because of our synergy, just last week, one of the conversations, the necessary conversation we had was to say, we need to focus on our misdemeanor offenders who are not getting access to treatment. And while Operation Rio Grande is focusing on felony behavior, there are hundreds of people who are not getting access to treatment in misdemeanor, whether it's mental health services or treatment services, and it allows us to at least parlay that communication in a way to better serve our community. So I think there are synergistic effects here that will be valuable. I don't think we will lose anything in terms of with the proximity of to be able to have this conversation.
We have no shortage of brilliant minds at the desks and microphones right now. And I think this conversation, I want this to be a productive conversation. We could volley for a very long time, but I want to recognize Councilmember Luke first, and then Councilmember Wharton, and then Councilmember Johnston, if we could try to keep it concise. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I want to try to redirect some of the discussion to, you know, the issue at hand, and that's, you know, whether or not we continue with the arrangement that we established 2 years ago. And I haven't really heard anything that indicates that the current setup is not working. I understand the hypotheticals, I understand the what ifs, but we don't have a lot of money just sitting around to go back and change course and try to fix something that could maybe potentially someday happen. I think that if there is an issue that arises, I will be, you know, one of the first to, you know, stand up and say, okay, let's revisit this issue, and let's talk about, you know, the concrete issue that we have at hand. But I'm not really ready to have that conversation right now because it's all theoretical and hypothetical. And so, you know, I think that, you know, the questions that we really need to be focusing on today is, one, is the system working for the city? Is the system working for the prosecutor's office? And if it is not, if there are issues with those things, that's what I'm interested in hearing, rather than, you know, what could maybe happen.
Councilmember Wharton.
So I feel a little bit, well, first I want to say, obviously, I think that it makes sense that in this short time that we've been doing this agreement that there haven't been any conflicts. And I think that part of the reason why Sim was elected DA is because of the outstanding things that he was able to do as a city prosecutor. And that includes working with the two of you as the first assistants. So it doesn't surprise me that there haven't been any problems with the three of you getting back together and working, you know, and doing this gig. But we have to make a decision about 10 years from now and everything that happens in between. And what happens, and I'm not as confident that a different team full of players that are half picked by us and half picked by voters is always going to work out. You guys have a culture that you established, and you're recreating the culture. So obviously it's going well. And I feel a little bit like what James was saying earlier, that I don't know that that's really a true test, because we know that the outcome was already going to work because it already worked before. My question is, you know, what about when we have disagreements over discovery fees, whether or not to charge them? That's something that we've had. What about when we have, if we have a district attorney that wants the city to cooperate with ICE and do ICE detentions? I mean, these are hypotheticals, but they're not far out of reach at all. These are things that have happened in the district attorney's office or in the city before. So how will those be handled, and who makes the final call?
So one of the things is that through the interlocal agreement, you will always be able to call the district attorney. You can call me, and my job and my whoever is in this position is to have this discussion in this public setting, to have that policy discussion if there is a issue that is coming up in terms of a policy. And that is part of that interlocal agreement, to be able to vet out those issues and share those concerns. I have always made myself available to this body at any time that they want to. That is the precedent that I've set, and the interlocal agreement recognizes that the city prosecutor, the district attorney, can be called by you to have that conversation, that necessary conversation. If there is a policy issue that is moving in different directions, of course, if the two parties have now moved in a different direction, it preserves the integrity of each side to be able to give notice, to be able to move away from this relationship. And that is something, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think what we can do is create the best model where the integrity and the dignity of each agency is preserved and the independence of each agency is preserved, that should the policy objectives get to such an impasse that they can move their separate way. The question then we need to ask is that, is it working, and what is it that we can make an informed decision on? And I think that that's a legitimate question, is there been value that's been given to the city prosecutor's office? And the commitment is there, and we're setting that precedent as we're going forward. But the best thing we can do for the future is to safeguard the dignity of each entity, to be independent, to be safe, and to be able to get back to square one if they want to.
Right, and that's sort of the basis of my questions is, first of all, who makes the final call on those?
On what? On the, for
discovery fees or on
I
working
can
with
tell you
ICE?
what my position is. For example, the Salt Lake County DA's office had at one time tried to charge fees. When I came into office, that was the first action that I did, was to settle that lawsuit with ACLU and remove the discovery fees away, because to me that is what is the right thing to do. And if there is a big policy, it's not to say that there couldn't be big policy concerns, but if that happens, that is a conversation that you would have with the district attorney and say that as far as Salt Lake City residents are concerned, as far as our cases are concerned, we don't want to charge that. And we can have that policy discussion. I don't know, maybe in the future, the costs of whatever it is, that there may be a rational basis, or there may never be.
Well,
But
and Sim, I'm just going to step in and remind you all that under our form of government, the council has the authority to set fees.
Yeah.
And the DA, acting as our prosecutor, would need to carry those out so long as they weren't unconstitutional. If this body passed a fee that was unconscionably high or something that the DA couldn't enforce,
All right.
that's a different problem, but fee setting is your authority.
So let's talk about the ICE situation. We've got, if we want to unwind this, we have to give 6 months notice, and we have to find a new building to move out of, and we have to hire a city prosecutor and other staff. Meanwhile, that's 6 months where the city is working with ICE, and we're deporting Salt Lake City families for minor offenses. How do we solve that problem? Whose call is that? Is it the city's call, or is it the DA's call?
Again, if if there's a legal concern and that policy is being done by that prosecuting entity, I think you get to have that conversation and you move to your separation as quickly as you can to take over that office. And if you can do it in 30 days, then you can take it over. But I assume if the premise of your argument is that decision is being made by that elected person, and I would assume whatever the rationale is, they would do it until the relationship is severed. You know, and so, I mean, that's what the contract spells out.
Right. Okay. Well, let me make it a little more clear, maybe. So, the Salt Lake City would be a client of the DA's office. Is that right?
It's an interlocal agreement between our two parties. Yes.
But who's the client? But we're a client. We're one of the clients.
That's right.
Right. So, if we're a client, like I understand that there's prosecutorial discretion and that exists regardless of whether we do the prosecutor's office together or separately.
Right.
But it doesn't trump like the rules of professional conduct, and it doesn't trump like the duty of loyalty. So what if there's a situation where the county and the DA in his elected capacity as DA has a position that is contrary to Salt Lake City's position? How do you manage that conflict?
Again, are you talking about in the terms of a civil issue or a criminal prosecution issue here?
Well, either way. I mean,
well, no, those are very different, distinct issues. Let's not merge those two aspects together. So, for example, when I put on my hat as the county attorney, my client is Salt Lake County, and I'm giving them civil advice just as Margaret does as well. And we have our respective clients for that. But the prosecutor is an independent body. So in the sense that you try to do what is ethical, you try to do what is constitutional, you try to do what is legal, and that is what should guide the action of a prosecutor. Even if I was right now the city prosecutor and the DA didn't happen, it didn't exist, and if you were to come to me and say, Sam, I want you to prosecute this case this way, I would say to you, okay, well, thank you for sharing that, but I'm going to make a decision which is based on the law and the evidence that's there.
Right.
And you know, so.
But that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is, what about if
my client in the prosecution is the integrity of that case. You and I get to have a policy discussion about the things that you may want to, but I would never let anyone control the prosecution of a particular matter. I would let the evidence and the law dictate that within my prosecutorial discretion.
And just pulling this in a little bit from the city perspective, I want to remind you, this is why I started with, these are city employees enforcing city ordinances.
I understand, but I'm just saying that if there's a prosecution that is in the county, let's say that the county feels one way and the city feels adverse to that, there's a conflict of loyalty there, right? Because
the loyalty would be driven by the case and the evidence. My counsel does not get to tell me how to prosecute a case.
Right.
My counsel has broad policy interests, and I take that input as a public servant. But what dictates the movement and the rhythm of the case is the law and the evidence of that case. So I don't see a conflict because I've never prosecuted because the mayor or the council tells me to prosecute a case one way from a county council or even from a city council when I was here for 10 years.
I'm going to move us on a little bit. Councilmember Johnston, jumping back to Councilmember Rogers.
Hello? I have a money issue. How about that?
See what we can do.
There's a lot of pieces to this because there's a management fee, operating fee, lease fee. This is more of an administration question for your budget, Margaret. Is currently the office space over there, it seems inadequate, what I understand, as far as just comfort, upkeep, those kind of things.
It hasn't been updated in a number of decades.
Is it 15,000 square feet currently over there?
So Jim Cleland from facilities went over and double checked, and it depends on how you measure, whether you count hallways and stuff. It's between 12,000 and 10,000 square feet of usable space.
Okay. Because I was trying to compare apples to apples, and it seems like even if a $1.15 million upgrade was done to bring it to Class B, B+, and compare it to A over here, which is obvious, it's about a $5 difference, $22.7 per square foot versus $27.7 per square foot, which comes out to about $75,000 a year difference.
Trust your math.
All right. You're the only one here who does.
I don't trust mine on the fly. Let me
So
put it
over
that way.
over a 10-year lease, we're talking about 750,000, give or take, based on a lot of other factors. And so one of the arguments from the administration was, separate from the interlocal agreement, this is just about physically moving the offices, is that the space is needed elsewhere. Has been an analysis done on the cost currently? And does it rise to that level, or is it comparable? Is there a sense of that, about relocating other city departments to that current space with the upgrade? And does it cost us as a city more or less? Give me a sense of there. Has that been done?
Well, and I know Ben asked me a number of questions about this, and Patrick may have some answers. I can give you sort of big picture.
Okay.
We're not, as you point out, we're not comparing apples to apples. And what we are doing is, I mean, this is a budget increase in future years. Everybody, no one's trying to hide that. It's about a $500,000 budget increase in future years. Again, this year's can be absorbed, and if costs continue to be saved, then, that may be an ongoing benefit. But what we're doing is locking in a payment for the 10-year term of the agreement. If market conditions tank, well, hindsight might say we made a bad deal. If market conditions continue to increase, we may have made a brilliant deal, because we've got a locked-in rate because it's based on the bond payment, which, as you know, only increased pursuant to the tables.
Margaret, may I interject that assumption of a $500,000 increase is assuming that we never made improvements to the 349 space where the prosecutor's office currently is?
Correct. I'm just talking about, we vacate the 5th floor, we leave it as is.
Which is in pretty poor condition.
My understanding is it's in C-
compared to other
or worse,
areas.
according to Real Estate Services.
Thanks.
They're a little worried it's bringing down the value of the building as a whole. The other floors have all been updated more regularly, but so far, insofar as the bonds are paid off and we're holding on to 349, then it's really for our benefit to renovate it. So yes, good point, Council Chair. I'm not talking about those costs. So I haven't, sorry, I lost a little bit track of your question. I haven't done the math on square footage. What are we paying now? What does it look like over there? Because we didn't base the lease fee that's in the proposed interlocal on that.
Sure. This is what the question sort of from the administration side
But
about.
the administration will tell you they have space constraints. People are bursting at the seams. We have people sitting in, unvented vaults. And freeing up the 5th floor of 349 allows other departments to reorganize, consolidate, and move over to 349 where they can work better. And so that's a cost that, like I say, I shared some numbers with Ben. I didn't crunch them myself to come up with a good answer, because it's sort of a hard comparison.
Yeah.
Especially if you think we need to put 1.5 million into it.
I don't doubt it's an upgrade in all areas. I mean, don't get me wrong. I saw the space. It's wonderful. The question is, from the city financial budget perspective, what does it make sense moving people into that absent that new vacated space, essentially, and what's the cost benefit over 10 years for us based on this lease? So.
And I guess the question would be, if we don't vacate the 5th floor and we need to find other space for the folks in this building who are bursting at the seams, what kind of space would we find, and at what rate, and what kind of guarantee would we have?
That's the question I had, sort of, what's research been done on that? Yeah. Is there anything out there?
Like I say, we've looked at a lot of numbers, and I'm not sure have digested a great summary.
And that's a piece of the overall consideration of benefits.
Correct.
Okay, Councilmember Rogers, then I'm going to look for a straw poll, perhaps.
I guess I have two questions, or maybe they're just comments. So would be for our city attorney, Margaret Plain. Have you seen the level of service or the quality of work from that department go down since we have made this agreement with the county?
Have I seen it go down?
Yeah, or do you think that it's still, or is the service improved?
No, I mean, disposition rates are increasing. The word on the street, I mean, a lot of what I understand is anecdotal, but let me be clear. A lot of what I understood about the prosecutor's office before this agreement was also anecdotal, because I hear from my colleagues in the defense and the prosecution bar about how things are going. The word on the street is things are going really well. And, one thing I regret in all of this, I will tell you, is that we didn't come up with a really great annual report or quarterly report that would help you see some of these disposition rates, the increase in Class A's, and how those have been absorbed. We've had a good talk about that, and we're going to be doing that. We should have done it all along. We did it sort of as part of our budget process, but we haven't consolidated that into a nice document for you. We're going to do that going forward, and I think it will demonstrate the improved services.
If I may just, for example, I can give you some just examples. For example, we had thousands and thousands of old warrants that were in the system. When we came in, we took all those warrants out, we closed those cases out, which were simply redundant and were bursting at the seams, and got rid of all that old paper and all those cases because they needed to be done. That was work that needed to be done. We cleared the dockets as a result of without having them sit in our system. We've tried to streamline all our processes in terms of internal work functions, so we're much more efficient with that. We have gotten rid of processes that were redundant internally to our organization. We have made a 2-year commitment and investment into every attorney who comes in there for their professional development and continuing legal education, which is done through the district attorney's office to get that access of that professional growth for them. So you may take this as bias from my perspective. The morale is good. We have invested young attorneys who know that we're investing in their quality growth, and as a result, we're getting great effort back from them and value for the taxpayers of Salt Lake City.
And then the bond for the building, is it a 20-year bond?
25 years.
Is there any way that we can have like an automatic kicker to renew for another 10 years afterwards so we don't have to negotiate?
Okay. I suppose we don't absolutely have to have a straw poll, but if anyone has one to give this some clarity, I'm sensing quite a bit of divide in opinion here.
I would propose a straw poll that we approve the agreement.
Second.
What about, may I ask, in discussion, and we can have discussion on this straw poll, the component that Margaret just brought up around getting us some measurable analytics, some feedback on it in a more concrete format.
And that's currently in the agreement, but it's sort of at the request of, and so we can change a few words and I think agree on a report that would be helpful.
I mean, would it be appropriate to have that report come during the budget while we're looking at those numbers anyway? And if we have to approve more money, that's something we could do.
I think that the kind of briefing that we're having just kind of coincidentally and before our budget presentation here, we could do as we do at the library or the airport before we get into the thick of budget season, and that would be appreciated and give us some time to contemplate it. Okay, James, do you want to say your straw poll?
I guess my straw poll would be that we would approve the interlocal agreement as stated with the few changes that we would have a briefing come during the budget season to talk about.
With an annual report. Charlie, you were second on that? Any other discussion? We'll roll call this. James Rogers? Yes. Charlie Luke? Yes. Amy Fowler? No. Chris Wharton?
I have to say, I think everybody has the best intention. I don't want to throw deer in this, but sorry, I have to vote no at this point.
Derek Kitchen? Yes. Andrew Johnston? Yes. And I am a yes, so that straw poll's going ahead. Gives us some clarity about what could come. We have this set for a public hearing on Tuesday, April 3rd with a tentative council action on April 17th. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
time.
Okay, we're moving on to item 9. We do have some time-sensitive board appointments at 5:50. So our final item before that is the Citizens Compensation Advisory Committee 2018 report and recommendations, where I believe we have, oh, I'm so sorry. There's a glare right over where the hour hands are for me. So we should probably put these fellows on hold, if you don't mind, and we can do our board appointments. Could you hang out with us for a moment?
Sure.
I apologize. We try to be more time sensitive to our board appointments. Josh Popple, if I've said your last name wrong, Joshua, please come up, and then we will hear from Matthew Castle after that. Joshua, it looks like we are considering you for appointment to the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Correct.
You're a member of District 5.
Yes.
As in, you're a resident Not that we have membership in my district. but-
Yes.
Mayor, please introduce us.
Well, I think I'll let him introduce himself and share his background and why this is an important role to him. And I think you'll see the expertise and the value he'll bring to this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So for the last 20 years, roughly, I've been working in the bike industry in some capacity or another, primarily in bike advocacy or bike planning. I worked for a consulting firm that really specialized in bicycle and pedestrian projects. So I have quite a bit of experience in that capacity. I've also lived and worked internationally in a couple of cities such as Amsterdam and Copenhagen, which really are usually presented as model bicycling cities. So I've lived in Salt Lake City now for 2 years. During that time, I've been a very active bike commuter, as well as a pretty prominent recreational rider. So I feel like I have a very intimate knowledge of the city through bicycling. And also during the 2 years that I've been here, excuse me, I've worked with Bike Utah to help set up their Salt Lake Action Group, which is supposed to be county-based advocacy, sort of focusing on some of their state work and really bringing it down to a local level. So I've also had the chance to really get to know a lot of the prominent players locally, and I've also been attending the advisory committee meetings as a citizen for the last 6 months, just to kind of keep apprised of what's going on.
Sounds like you're well informed locally and worldwide.
Yes.
Council members, any questions, comments? Councilmember Johnston, please.
Yeah, sorry you have to live on the east side.
Oh.
I don't think I've ever seen a resume that's so full of bicycling on all levels. So I give you credit. I'm glad you're here in Salt Lake City. I'm glad you're interested in this. And I look very much forward to your impact. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnston.
It's that easy sometimes.
Well, when you're this
you're
good.
well qualified. Thank you for your willingness to serve on this board. You already are in other ways. Thank you for being so engaged in this part of our community, and we are dedicated. Our Complete Streets Ordinance is a piece of the way that we've shown our dedication to expanding safe biking options around the city as a real means of transportation. So as we look at new funding options for our streets too, this committee will have an impact, I think.
Real opportunity coming down the road. It's going to be great.
Thank you.
So we do advice and consent in our formal meeting, which takes place across the hall way too soon. You don't need to stay and be present to be approved at that point, but we thank you. And you can tune in on Channel 17 or stick around if you want to, or just assume that it went well.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the
Thank
time.
you, Mr. Popple. Okay, now we will look at the advice and consent of our Salt Lake City engineer, Matthew Castle. Please come on up. We apologize again for the delay in this piece of our agenda.
So Matthew comes to us from Park City Municipal Corporation and has been there since 2008. Past work experience includes water resource team leader for project management. He's a project manager for Forsgren Associates and a project manager at American Consulting Engineers in Indianapolis. Has a master's in business administration and a bachelor's of science in civil engineering. And really, now that the cat is out of the bag because we're on TV, we want to make sure that he gets this spot.
Sorry, Park City.
Yes. Good evening.
Welcome.
What would you like to know?
The mayor did a good rundown of the top of your resume, and you have lots of experience in this regard. I guess I'll ask my peers if they have any questions for you, unless there's anything she didn't cover that you'd like to fill in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything you want to submit before us?
Just small little things. I was talking with some people in 2011, Park City, when we did our master plan, transportation master plan, it was based on complete streets. So I still believe it was the first complete streets concept in the state of Utah. So I've been proud of that, and I've learned every day what that means and where we're going with it. I'm glad I'm coming to a city that envelops that idea.
I have a maybe strange question, but do you live up the canyon as well?
I actually live in Sandy. I've commuted up there
Goodness
for
sakes.
10 years.
Well, we welcome you to move to Salt Lake City.
Yes.
As our probable new city engineer. We like to bring our leadership in the city into the city as
Yes.
well. So I can't recommend a real estate agent for you, but
I've
I
got a
can.
few.
Please consider that. Council members, anything for Mr. Castle? I guess we do have one question around technology and how that shapes your job and the approach of the city. If you have any feedback, I'm not sure what kind of technologies Park City incorporated into their engineering, but that's something that we've been keen on.
Okay. We explore and we experiment and we try things, especially in the public engagement. We love to get into the internet area, and every week it seems there's a new app or a new program that's come on, and we've tried quite a few, some with success, some with very little success, but we keep trying and we keep looking, trying to find the ones that may one day be the ones that we ultimately want to use.
What about sensors?
As
That
in,
side of technology, building sensors into our roadways.
you know, we've looked at our roadway and we've struggled because one of the things we looked at was solar panels to generate energy off of our roads and off of our sidewalks. And the world is going toward sensors everywhere to try to be able to understand as things move and as things age that you can track and be better prepared to replace and or fix, do what you ever need to do. It's not fully there, but it's something that's growing and it's something we always need to keep our eye on.
Yes, that's what we're hearing as
What we're
well.
hearing, yep.
As we look at making some potential significant investments in our roadways, I think we'll want to have those considerations before us. So thank you for this. Thank you, Mayor, for bringing this candidate before us.
You're
and
welcome.
just as I said to Mr. Popple, you need not stick around. You don't have to, what is it, play to win?
Be present
Be
to
present
win.
to win, thank you, during our formal meeting. So you may be excused if you have better things to do, or you can stick around for our 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Same here.
Thank you. Okay, CCAC, come on up. Sorry, council members, I apologize to my peers that we haven't had a bathroom break since 4:15, and we probably aren't going to
Make
get to
this
eat
quick.
dinner.
That's all right. Madam Chair, I just want to,
Don't, you. It was a legacy of Council Chair Luke that I regret to have continued on today. Please give us an introduction if you don't mind, and we'll jump right into it.
great.
David Salazar, I'm a Human Resource Program Manager dealing with compensation in our HR department.
And I'm Jeff Herring. I am the chair, the acting chair of the CCAC this year.
Thank you both for being with us. I assume that we've all had a chance, I'm not sure if the opportunity actually came to fruition, to have a briefing on the report for this year, but can you walk us through some of the highlights?
Absolutely. Yeah, we did have a chance to meet with many of you. I'll just go through the highlights for the sake of time, and with that, I think you all have a copy of the report, but the first area in the report that the committee looked at was the salary budget forecast. We looked at the World at Work, which is the industry leader, and what we look at as far as projections of what cost of living increases are going to be. Just to be noted on that the national cost of living increases have also been extrapolated down into the local levels. They actually last year were 3%. Projections for this year are 3.1%, and that is what we're forecasting on that. The next page talks about Salt Lake City turnover. Very healthy in what the committee saw with compared to the national averages of turnover, which is 18.5. Really what we look at in the industry is voluntary turnover is the most concerning. Last year that was 7.6% voluntary turnover. This year it's down to 7.1, which is a very healthy number. You don't seem to have any type of issues with attracting fine candidates to Salt Lake City. There were 418 recruitments open in 2017, and you had over 17,500 applicants for that. So a very good picture of what the turnover is and what we reviewed with the CCAC. Local market comparisons. Again, the committee reiterated to the human resource and the compensation team within the Salt Lake City is that we'd like to see that stay at 95% of when we're doing our market comparability studies on that, setting that median actual wage of the jobs that are being surveyed at 95%. We think that's healthy in being able to attract and retain good talent as we do that. The actual pay rates that you can say, we look at, we looked at the actual pay rates as opposed to minimums and maximums. We think that gives us the best comparator as you're doing the analysis across the industries that we're looking at. As they look at that, there's two sources that we're looking at. One is a local, includes private and public. The other market sources for that are mostly municipal and public entities that are looking at that. We try and we want always take a look and we see where in those market comparabilities the benchmarks are leading the markets with particular focus on the private industries. Last year there were 20 areas where there was significant lead in those jobs, and this year that's gone up to 26. So the committee recommends, as one of the recommendations, is to make sure that you as leaders of the city and the mayor are considering looking at that, and what you do in those salary adjustments doesn't continue to exacerbate that issue. I think there's very many reasons that you might want to lead the market, but when it gets continues to grow, that puts some challenges on a public workforce as well. Please stop me anytime. On the other end of that spectrum, we also look where there's significant lag. That's gone from 7 down to 2 this year, which is, in the time that I've been on the committee, as good as I've seen, I think, as Mr. Salazar has indicated as well, that's something that you should be commended on, that you've only got 2 benchmarks that are significantly or slightly below where we're targeting the market to be. Those are the appointed city attorneys, which the external market moved significantly last year, and the paralegals. The next one is the living wage. The next section of the report is the living wage. Last year that was $10.87 for a single individual for the expenditures and what they're projected to takes to live in Salt Lake City, a local, again, comparison. That's moved to $11.09 this year. As we look in that, as we made a recommendation from the committee, instead of making those adjustments, you made an adjustment last year to get that to $10.87. Instead of making adjustments every year, we recommend that you wait until there becomes a 5% movement from your last adjustment, which would get it to $11.41 before we would recommend again making that living wage adjustment to that. The last section in there is on gender pay equity. The committee considered a variety of reports. The national average was 20 cents, 80 cents on the dollar. Utah was 70 cents on the dollar. As we took a look at Salt Lake City, it was 93 cents. So as you looked at that, 93 cents on the dollar. So there's 7%.
I'm sorry, were you saying that the national average is 20 cents on the dollar?
No, 80.
Thank you.
80
I
cents
was
on the
going to
dollar.
say, I swear I heard you say 20.
I mixed my it's 80 cents. It's 20 cents below the.
As being 4th worst in the nation, I'm pretty
no,
sure.
thank
We're
you,
not
thank you
that
very
close,
much.
thanks.
80 cents on the dollar. Utah 70 cents on the dollar, and Salt Lake City was 93 cents on the dollar.
Which still isn't okay.
There's absolutely work to be done with that. As the committee looked at that area, the determination that we made was that the best comparator is in same jobs as opposed to similar jobs. So our recommendation to the council and to the mayor is to continue look at same jobs, much more objective standards. As you're taking a look at that,
We also found that and I think we've made the suggestion to try and find and quantify the differentiators in that, but where there was discrepancies, those discrepancies did not seem to be gender related. They were mostly time and service, training, and other factors that are non-gender related. So from where we're at, while there is certainly work to be done, it is in a better reflective state than many others.
And that's what we see in Appendix D, where we see the unders and the overs on
Correct.
specific jobs for gender pay.
Correct.
That may not be gender pay influenced, you're saying.
What's that?
That may not be influenced by gender, actually. So we're breaking down these specific job categories where there's a discrepancy in pay from male to female on a specific job. But
The same jobs.
the discrepancy in pay, you're saying, has been analyzed and is not gender-based.
Correct.
And that's actually a process that we went through prior to presenting this information to the committee, and actually subsequent to producing the report, taking a deeper look at the incumbents in these jobs to see what differences there were. And what we found really is that those are due primarily to experience. And so you may have, in some cases, a male who has 20 years or more performing the same job, and a female incumbent whose experience is considerably less. So in those instances, you would expect to see some differences in pay based on just experience alone if they're newer to that role.
Okay.
And so, and that's, that we found to be true in just about every case.
Councilmember Luke?
Madam Chair, thank you very much. I just want to thank you both. I had the opportunity to meet with you and some of the other HR folks this morning to talk about this. Just 2 points that I made to you there that I want to raise here for the record. I just think that it's important when using certain surveys that we use that were consistent across the board and not jump from national to local to regional to and back and forth. I think that if we don't have the actual data, I think we can state that and clarify it. But I think that the more consistent we can be, the better that data is going to look. And as we move forward with the budget, I just encourage not only the CCAC but the administration as well to continue working with the 3 bargaining groups so that when the budget comes forward, those discussions are real discussions and that we're consistent with the intent of this council. So thank you.
I'll second that. Anything else, council members? Thank you. We're sorry to keep you so long for such a brief discussion. And with that, I think we will conclude. We are not going to hold a closed session today. Do we have report and announcements from Jennifer Bruno, our Deputy Director? We don't have a report of the Chair and Vice Chair. And it doesn't look like we have any announcements, so we're going to conclude. And council members, I have asked that we tell the giant crowd across the hall, because it's CDBG night, that we're not going to start till 7:15. So please do eat and have water and go to the bathroom. And then we'll sit down for another 3 hours at 7:15 across the hall. Thank you.